We were reading about Thoreau's neighbors, basically, his neighborhood friends and his brute friends. We read about the ant battle. And before, there was a mouse in his house, apparently. So what kind of... I thought it was neighbors, but it turns out it's my own brutal nature that he's talking about. We're continuing after the ant battle in Walden, and the brute neighbors. Many a village bosee, fit only to course of mud turtle in a virtualling cellar, sported his heavy quarters in the woods without the knowledge of his master, and ineffectually smelled at old fox burrows and woodchuck holes, but perchance by some slight cur which nimbly threaded the wood, and might still inspire a natural terror in his denizens, now far behind his guide, barking like a canine bull towards some small squirrel which had twiggied itself for scrutiny, then kinking off, bending up the bushes with his weight, and imagining that he is on the track of some stray member of the Gerbila family. Here I think a cur is a dog. It's a rather long-winded sentence about a dog chasing after. Yeah, it's natural, like you might be in the woods and you'll hear usually you have hound dogs which will be chasing after a coon. I didn't really go coon hunting much, but apparently you go at night. I go at night with a flashlight, uh, but he's got the same thing. He's got a dog, which you'll hear them barking at a distance. Once I was surprised to see a cat walking along the stony shore of the pond, where they rarely wander, so far from home. The surprise was mutual. Nevertheless, the most domestic cat, which has lain on a rug all her days, appears quite at home in the woods, and by her sly and stealthy behavior proves herself more native there than the regular inhabitants. Once when berrying, I met with a cat with young kittens in the woods, quite wild, and they all, like their mother, had their backs up and were fiercely spitting at me. A few years before I lived in the woods, there was what was called a winged cat in one of farmhouses in Lincoln nearest the pond, Mr. Gillian Baker's. I wonder if there's such a thing as cats in the wild, domestic cats that turn wild. I don't know. I don't necessarily see that, though there are wildcats. When I called to see her in June 1842, she was gone a-hunting in the woods, as was her wont. I'm not sure whether it was a male or female, and so used the more common pronoun. But her mistress told me that she came into the neighborhood a little more than a year before, in April, and was finally taken into their house. That she was of dark brownish-gray color, with a white spot on her throat and white feet, and had a large bushy tail like a fox. That in the winter the fur grew thick and flattened out along her sides, forming strips 10 or 12 inches long by 2.5 wide, and under her chin like a muff, the upper side loose, the under matted like felt, and in the spring these appendages dropped off. Do you think cats' fur gets thicker in the winter? Do they shed? They gave me a pair of her wings, which I kept still. There is no appearance of a membrane about them. Some thought it was part flying squirrel and some other wild animal, which is not impossible, for according to naturalists, prolific hybrids have been produced by the union of the marten and domestic cat. This would have been the right kind of cat for me to keep. So, according to him, you should have a cat that's a union of a marten and a domestic cat. That would be the right kind of cat for me to keep, and if I had kept any. For why should not a poet's cat be winged as well as his horse? Question mark. You think his horse should be winged? He should have a flying horse. He's talking in the abstract now. In the fall, the loon, that's the duck, came as usual to molt and bathe in the pond. So far, we've had a cat come, we've had a dog run by, we've had the ant battle, and the mouse. Talking about Thoreau's brute neighbors, I guess his animal neighbors. In the fall, the loon was the duck came by, making the woods ring with his wild laughter before I had risen. At rumor at his arrival, all the mill-dam sportsmen are on alert, in gigs and on foot, 2x2 and 3x3, with patent rifles and conical balls and spyglasses. Poor ducks. Do you think ducks should just be shot off the pond? In my poetry book, I have ducks on the pond, but they're not shot at. They come rustling through the woods like autumn leaves, at least 10 men to one loon. That's horrible. They have 10 men with 10 shotguns against one loon. Some station themselves on this side of the pond, some on that. For the poor bird cannot be omnipresent. If he dove here, he must come up there. But now the kind October wind rises, rustling the leaves and rippling the surface of the water, so that no loon can be heard or seen through his foes sweep the pond with spyglasses and make the woods resound with their discharges. The waves generally rise and dash angrily, taking sides with all waterfowl, and our sportsmen must beat a retreat to town and shop in unfinished jobs, but they were too often successful. When I went to get a pail of water early in the morning, I frequently saw the stately birds sailing out of my cove within a few rods. If I endeavored to overtake him in a boat, in order to see how he would maneuver, he would dive and be completely lost, so that I did not discover him again, sometimes till the latter part of the day. But I was more than a match for him on the surface. He commonly went off in a harangue. As I was paddling along the north shore, one very calm October afternoon, for such days especially they settle onto the lakes like the milkweed down. Having looked in vain over the pond for a loon, suddenly one, sailing out from the shore towards the middle, a few rods in front of me, set up his wild laugh and betrayed himself. I pursued with the paddle, and he dived, but when he came up, I was nearer than before. So he outsmarted him. He was like a submarine, right? And he was able to guess where he would come up. He would have been good in the submarine warfare. He dived again, but I miscalculated the direction he would take, and we were 50 rods apart when he came to the surface this time, for I had helped to widen the interval, and again he laughed long and loud, and with more reason than before. He maneuvered so cunningly that I could not get within half a dozen rods of him. Do you think the duck is smarter than a submarine captain? Did you see the movie Das Boot? You gonna make coffee? No. Each time when he came to the surface, turning his head this way and that, he coolly surveyed the water and the land, and apparently chose his course so that he might come up where there was the widest expanse of water and at the greatest distance from the boat. It was surprising how quickly he made up his mind and put his resolve into execution. He led me at once to the widest part of the pond, and could not be driven from it. While he was thinking one thing in his brain, I was endeavoring to divine his thought in mine. It was a pretty game played on the smooth surface of the pond, a man against a loon. Wow. Now we have the ant battle. Now we have man against duck. Man versus duck in the submarine warfare. Do you ever play games in nature? Suddenly your adversary's checker disappears beneath the board, and the problem is to place yours nearest to where he will appear again. Sometimes he would come up unexpectedly on the opposite side of me, having apparently passed directly under the boat. So long-winded was he, and so unwearable, that when he had swum farthest he would immediately plunge again. Nevertheless, and then no wit could divine where in the deep pond. Beneath the smooth surface he might be speeding his way like a fish, for he had time and ability to visit the bottom of the pond in its deepest part. It is said that loons have been caught in the New York lakes 80 feet beneath the surface, with hooks set for trout 80 feet. Now how far that is? That's 8 times 10 feet. Although Walden is deeper than that, how surprised must the fish be to see this ungainly visitor from another sphere speeding his way amidst their schools. Yet he appeared to know his course as surely under water as on the surface, and swam much faster there. Once or twice I saw a ripple where he approached the surface, just put his head out to reconnoiter, and instantly dived again. I know that it was as well for me to rest on my oars, and wait his reappearing, as to endeavor to calculate where he would rise, for again and again, when I was straining my eyes over the surface one way, I would suddenly be startled at his unearthly laugh beneath me. But why, after displaying so much cunning, did he invariably betray himself the moment he came up by that loud laugh? Did not. Who's he laughing at, Thoreau? Is he laughing? Did the duck laugh at Thoreau? He says it's a laugh. Did he outsmart Thoreau in the submarine warfare? Did not his little breast enough betray him? He was indeed a silly loon. Could it be this particular duck? I thought I could commonly hear the splash of the water when he came up, and so also detected him. But after an hour he seemed as fresh as ever, dived as willingly, and swam yet farther than at first. It was surprising to see how serenely he sailed off with unruffled breast when he came to the surface, doing all the work with his web feet beneath. His usual note was his demonic laughter, yet somewhat like that of a waterfowl, but occasionally, when he had bulked me most successfully and come up a long way off, he uttered a long-drawn, unearthly howl, mostly more like that of a wolf than a bird, as when a beast puts his muzzle to the ground and deliberately howls. You know, they have a museum in Maryland, and it's dedicated to like sort of ducks. They're actually decoys. Decoys are a big factor in duck hunting. If you have a good decoy, you put it out, and that attracts ducks. So there's a whole art form of making decoys. And they have an entire art museum, a museum in Maryland, dedicated to waterfowl arts. You see, over the years I went to at least 1,000 art museums, including minor ones like waterfowl arts. This was his looning. That's kind of loony, though. This was his looning, perhaps the wildest sound that is ever heard here. Making the woods ring far and wide, I concluded that he laughed in derision of my efforts, confidant of his own resources. Though the sky was by this time overcast, the pond was so smooth that I could see where he broke the surface when I did not hear him. His white breast, the stillness of the air, and the smoothness of the water were all against him. At length, having come up 50 rods off, he uttered one of those prolonged howls, as if calling on the god of loons to aid him, and immediately there came a wind from the east, and rippled the surface, and filled the whole air with misty rain, and I was impressed as if it were the prayer of the loon answered. You think the loon can control the weather by calling up the god of the loons to bring wind and rain? If people can do it, why can't the loon? And his god was angry with me, so I left him disappearing far away on the tumultuous surface. For hours in fall days I watched the ducks cunningly tack and veer and hold the middle of the pond, far from the sportsman tricks which they will have less need to practice in Louisiana bayous. When compelled to rise, they would sometimes circle round and over the pond at a considerable height, for which they could easily see to other ponds and the river, like black motes in the sky, and when I thought they had gone off thither long since. Here's that word, thither. Is that your favorite word? To go, gone off thither. Gone off thither means somewhere else. Long since, they would settle down by a slanting flight of a quarter of half a mile into a distant part which was left free. But what besides safety they got by sailing in the middle of Walden, I do not know, unless they love its water for the same reason that I do. The ducks loved it for the same reason he does. Well, we ended the submarine battle of Thoreau with the ducks. It was not a battle because they both loved the pond equally. And we found out that Thoreau prefers his cat to be a mixture with the marten. If he had a cat. And that's the end of brutish critters. Brutish critters. Do you think a duck is a brute critter? A brute neighbor? The definition of brutish. Do you feel there's an element of the brute within me? And this is an abstract expressionist book. We read from Brute, the second part of Brute Neighbors, about the cat and the dog who came by, and the ducks. It's not the ducks on the pond, the Smiling Whiteness Pond, but it's not on Smith Pond, it's on Walden Pond. The loons or ducks, and how you predict where they'll come up and dive and come up. You'd have to take out a rowboat onto Walden Pond, which I don't know if that's allowed, and if there are any ducks left.